The chandeliered ballroom of the Regal Hotel glittered like a constellation trapped in crystal, its light fracturing across polished tables and the sharp edges of 100 wine glasses. The gala, a shimmering affair for Quinn Enterprises' latest charity drive, had hushed for the paddle raise when a small voice sliced through the silence like a blade through silk. "Mom, when do I get a dad I actually like?" Sophie Lane's words, amplified by the microphone she clutched, hung in the air, raw and unscripted, as if the room itself had forgotten how to exhale. Glasses froze midair, caught in the delicate paws of birds before flight. Eyes darted, some to the stage, some to their phones, seeking refuge in the glow of screens. A nervous chuckle rippled from a corner, but it was swallowed by the weight of the moment. On the stage, Eleanor Quinn stood unyielding, her silver gown catching the light like a blade, her posture forged in the fires of boardroom battles and earnings calls. But Sophie's question struck where armor failed, deep in the tender hollow behind her ribs. She didn't flinch, though her heart stuttered, a silent tremor only she could feel. The crowd shifted, uncertain. Was this a stunt? A whisper hissed from table 7, where a tuxedoed investor, Charles Warner, leaned to his date, his voice sharp with disdain. "This is why founders shouldn't bring kids." He forgot the cameras, their lenses hungry for every misstep, drinking his words like fine wine. Eleanor stepped from the podium, her heels clicking softly against the stage's polished wood, and knelt to meet Sophie's unflinching gaze. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice a velvet anchor, "we talk about big things at home." At 10, Sophie was unafraid of microphones or the weight of a room's attention. She pulled the mic closer, her small hands steady. "We do, but home doesn't listen like this room does." The ballroom inhaled as one, a collective breath that seemed to pull the chandeliers tighter. A murmur stirred, a static hum of shock and curiosity. Sophie tugged Eleanor's sleeve, her voice softer but no less resolute. "You said love isn't a business plan, but you also said you hire people who fit our family. I want to help." Eleanor's laugh was small, real, a fleeting crack in her CEO facade, like sunlight slipping through a shuttered window. "I did say that," she admitted, rising to take the microphone. Her voice returned, measured and clear, a beacon cutting through the haze. "Most of you know I was widowed when Sophie was 6. Grief doesn't vanish. It reshapes itself, moves from knocking at the door to living quietly in the pantry, waiting for you to notice. Tonight, my 10-year-old daughter asked, in front of all of you, if she can help choose who joins our family someday." A camera flashed, its light a sudden flare in the dim. Another phone lifted, apologetic but greedy. The MC hovered, anxious to reclaim the script. But Eleanor raised a palm. Not yet. The event planner's lips formed a silent plea. "Please land this plane." Eleanor faced the crowd, her eyes scanning the sea of tailored suits and glittering gowns. "To be clear," she said, her voice steady as granite, "Sophie isn't hiring a father, and I'm not hosting auditions for my heart." A chuckle rippled through the room, tentative but warm. "But I am listening to my daughter. For the next 4 weeks, we'll seek honest, ordinary moments. Away from ballrooms like this, in daylight, without glitter or pressure. Moments where Sophie and I can meet good men and see how we feel. She gets a voice, I keep the decision. That's what family is. Voice and responsibility, sharing the table." At table 2, a lawyer nodded, almost despite himself. In the press row, a journalist's pen underlined voice and responsibility, the words ringing like a bell in the quiet. Sophie leaned into the microphone one last time, her voice bright and unshakable. "And there has to be ice cream. You can tell everything about a person by how they order ice cream." The room erupted in laughter, the tension unraveling like a ribbon in the wind. Eleanor pressed a kiss to Sophie's temple, her lips lingering a moment longer than necessary, grounding herself in her daughter's warmth. She stood, the script she'd prepared now a paper airplane lost in a storm. "Now," she said, her voice a quiet command, "let's raise money for homes that don't have to ask these questions in public." The paddle raise soared, fueled by the strange alchemy of scandal and generosity. Eleanor played her part, smiling for photos, shaking hands with donors, her silver gown a beacon of composure. But when the speeches faded and the piano's notes washed over the room like a tide, she slipped to the balcony's edge, where the city sprawled below, its lights glittering like a jewelry box left open in the dark. Sophie padded up beside her, her small frame dwarfed by the skyline. "Are you mad at me?" she asked, her voice a whisper against the hum of Midtown. Eleanor shook her head, draping her shawl over Sophie's shoulders, the fabric soft as a promise. "I'm proud of you." Sophie's eyes searched hers. "I didn't mean to interrupt. It just felt like, if I didn't say it then, I wouldn't say it at all." Eleanor's heart clenched, recognizing the truth in her daughter's words. "That's how truth behaves," she said, her voice low, reverent. "It needs a microphone, or it loses its nerve." Sophie leaned into her side, her warmth a quiet anchor. "I miss him less when I think about what could be next." Eleanor swallowed, her throat tight with unspoken grief. "Me too," she whispered, resting her chin on Sophie's hair, wondering when hope had stopped feeling like a betrayal and started feeling like a fragile, precious choice. The balcony door clicked open, and the MC's voice cut through the night, gentle but urgent. "Press is gathering downstairs," he said. "We can decline, but they'll spin whatever story they've already written." Eleanor looked at Sophie, her gaze steady. "One rule," she said. "No one learns anything about you that you don't choose to share. This is our story, not their buffet." Sophie squared her shoulders, her small frame radiating defiance. "Got it." They descended into the press room, a garden of cameras blooming with sharp, flashing light. Questions flew like confetti laced with teeth. "Ms. Quinn, are you launching a dating show? Is this healthy for a child? Are you saying money can buy a family?" Eleanor raised a hand, silencing the storm. "I'm saying children deserve a say in the shape of their lives. I'm saying grief is real and love is careful. The only format is decency." A reporter with sharp eyeliner cut through the noise. "Criteria, Ms. Quinn. If men are listening tonight, what should they know?" Eleanor paused, her gaze softening as it found Sophie. "Kindness is non-negotiable. Integrity under pressure. Humor that doesn't wound. And a willingness to eat ice cream in winter." She smiled at her daughter, a private warmth in a public storm. A voice called from the back, brash and probing. "What about money? Would you date below your tax bracket?" Eleanor's smile cooled, sharp as frost. "I won't date arrogance," she said, taking Sophie's hand. "Good night." In the car, the city's pulse thrummed outside the tinted windows. Sophie's voice broke the quiet. "You didn't look scared." Eleanor's lips curved, a confession tucked into the corners. "I was terrified. I just didn't let my face vote." Sophie's laugh was a small gate swinging open, bright and unguarded. "Can one of the places be the Science Museum? If a man can't wonder at a dinosaur, he can't wonder at me." Eleanor nodded, her heart swelling. "Add it to the list." At home, the penthouse smelled of lemon and paper, a sanctuary of order in a chaotic world. Two calendars sat on the kitchen island, one for Quinn Enterprises' quarterly closings, the other for Sophie's piano recitals and orthodontist appointments. Eleanor poured tea, knowing she wouldn't finish it, and opened her laptop. The board would email by dawn, HR fretting over optics, legal drafting bullet points about privacy and minors. She'd answer them all, but not yet. Instead, she typed a note to herself, her fingers steady against the keys. 4-week plan, low-key meetings, daytime public spaces, no press. Background checks, yes. Sophie's input recorded privately. Therapy check-ins with Dr. Samuel Klein bi-weekly. Ordinary moments over stage ones. Sophie drifted in, her pajamas adorned with watercolor moons, her steps light as a dream. "Can I sleep in your room?" she asked. Eleanor smiled, soft but firm. "You can start there. Then I'll carry you back because you're a human anvil." Sophie protested, climbing onto the bed with the effortless grace of childhood. "I'm not heavy." She gazed at the city beyond the glass, its lights pulsing like a heartbeat. "Will people be mean online?" Eleanor tucked the blanket around her. "Some will, but they're typing at screens, not standing in our kitchen. Kitchen rules matter more." "What are kitchen rules?" Sophie asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Eleanor's voice softened, each word a vow. "We use names, not labels. We talk to faces, not profiles, and we eat ice cream in winter. Sophie grinned, a spark of delight. You heard that. Eleanor tucked the blanket tighter. Tomorrow we'll make the list, not just names, the qualities that matter. Sophie's voice grew sleepy but serious. What if the best person doesn't look like the best person? Eleanor brushed hair from her daughter's forehead, her heart full. Then we learn to look better. Sophie's eyes drifted closed. Mom, if I ask a question in a room again, and your ribs make that face, will you still let me ask it? Eleanor's throat tightened, but her voice was steady. That's what our house is for. Questions that make ribs ache. A text buzzed on the nightstand. Amelia Singh, her COO, with a string of question marks and a single line. Are you sure? Eleanor typed back, her fingers certain. I'm sure of the why. We'll make the how responsible. She set the phone down, the city's siren song weaving through the night, its pulse matching her own. In the quiet, she felt the weight of a decision settling. Not a plan, but a promise to build a life where love could find a home. By morning, the headlines swirled like the snow flurries outside, impatient and sharp, each one vying to define the night's meaning. Investors demanded context. Old friends texted words like brave, while others chose harsher adjectives, their voices crackling through the digital ether. But in the lemon-scented quiet of the penthouse, between two calendars, one charting Quinn Enterprises' ambitions, the other Sophie's piano lessons and dreams, Eleanor Quinn sat under the soft glow of a lamp. Her pen traced a single, unshakable truth. Let's build a life that would be safe for love to enter. She switched off the light, and in the velvet dark, Sophie's whisper rose, a prayer offered to the room itself. Let him be kind. Eleanor stared at the ceiling, her own silent vow weaving into the night. Let me be brave enough to recognize him when he looks nothing like what I imagine. Outside, the snow danced, late and perfect for ice cream in winter. By sunrise, the headlines had softened from scandal to speculation, but inside the glass-walled conference room of Quinn Enterprises, speculation sat at the table like an uninvited guest. Amelia Singh, Eleanor's COO, slid a folder across the polished oak, her voice steady but laced with caution. 5 prospects, she said. All vetted. No liabilities, no tabloid traps. Each one intersects with our pipeline in a legitimate way. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. Vetted for the business, she said, not for my kitchen table. Amelia's lips curved faintly. That's why we stack the deck with daylight. Coffee shops, museums, no champagne, 2 therapists on speed dial, and legals drafted consent forms if anyone so much as glances at a camera. Dr. Samuel Klein's voice crackled through the speaker, calm and grounding. Ground rules, Eleanor. You set boundaries. Sophie shares feelings. No one performs. Wonder is welcome. Pressure is not. Sophie sat beside her mother, her sneakers swinging above the floor, a small rebellion against the room's formality. Can we see dinosaurs before we see men? She asked, her voice bright with possibility. Eleanor's smile was soft, a flicker of warmth in the corporate chill. We can see both, but no letting either bite. Sophie's grin lit up the room, a spark of defiance and delight. Amelia tapped the folder, her tone brisk. Option 1. Nathan Blake, 42, attorney specializing in land use. Witty, charming, allergic to shortcuts. Teaches mock trial at a public school on Saturdays. Pro bono, on purpose. Dr. Klein's voice hummed approval. Good sign, Amelia continued. Next, Dr. Henry Foster, pediatric cardiologist. Empathy is his trade. He's advising a wellness center, eyeing a partnership with our Riverside Commons project. Sophie tilted her head, her brow furrowing. A heart doctor feels like cheating. Eleanor chuckled, the sound a rare crack in her armor. Sometimes a good cheat. Third, Oliver Reed, Amelia said, managing partner at Reed Capital. A numbers whisperer. Donors chase him at galas. If money could do a backflip, he'd be the coach. Sophie's nose wrinkled. Translation, he's great at math and terrible at cookies. Amelia stifled a laugh, her professionalism wavering. 4. Gabriel Ortiz, architect. Believes buildings should be kind to their inhabitants. Grew up in a two-bedroom with 5 siblings and never forgot it. Sophie tasted the phrase, her voice soft. Kind buildings, like chairs that don't bully backs. Amelia nodded, then finished. 5. Vincent Cole, second-generation hotelier. Runs properties like orchestras, quiet hands, perfect timing. He's offering long-term housing for our Veterans Initiative. Eleanor exhaled, her mind sifting through the names. They were all decent, men she could speak to without her face searching for a map. Their ties to her work weren't accidental, a safeguard, not a strategy. Love wasn't a business plan, but purpose was a sane place to start. Okay, she said, her voice firm. Daylight it is. No headlines, no auditions. We meet people like people. Sophie raised her hand, as if in a classroom. And ice cream, non-negotiable. The room softened with laughter, a brief respite from the weight of decisions. They crafted a calendar that felt more like a field trip than a courtship. Coffee near the park with Nathan, a 10-minute hospital tour with Dr. Foster, a housing equity lecture where Oliver vowed to listen without interrupting, a sight walk with Gabriel, who favored hard hats over hard sells, and lunch in a hotel lobby with Vincent, where Sophie would judge the piano player's song choices. Eleanor sent invitations, each one deliberate and clear. We're keeping this small, no cameras, 2 humans and a child. If that's inconvenient, we're not a fit. By late morning, all 5 replied with a yes, their words polite but tinged with curiosity. 2 days later, the first ordinary moment unfolded on Block 17, a stretch of brick and promise where Quinn Enterprises planned Riverside Commons, a mixed-use haven of ground-floor grocers, upper-floor apartments, and a courtyard strung with lights that would glow like summer in November's chill. Frost clung to the scaffolding, glinting in the morning sun. Hard hats rested on a sawhorse, white as punctuation marks. Gabriel Ortiz handed Sophie a child-sized helmet, stenciled with Quinn, his voice warm but steady. Rule 1, no bad questions on a job site. Ask anything. Sophie fastened the chin strap, her eyes gleaming. Why are pigeons always invited to construction? Gabriel's smile was solemn, playful. They never sign NDAs. Sophie's giggle echoed, a bright note against the steel and concrete. Eleanor watched, noting Gabriel's gentle timing, not performative, but inclusive, as if Sophie's curiosity was as vital as the blueprints. They walked the site's perimeter, Gabriel explaining load paths with the hushed reverence of sharing a secret. Sophie touched a column, her fingers tracing its rough surface. So this is the bone, she said, awe coloring her voice. It is, Gabriel replied. The skin comes later. Eleanor's heart stirred, a quiet recognition of the man's patience, his ability to make the world make sense to a child. Near the freight elevator, a superintendent waved, then frowned at a beeping panel. She's been cranky all morning, he said, thumbing the call button. Maintenance check in 20. The gate rattled open, its groan like a warning. Eleanor hesitated, her instincts prickling. We can take the stairs. Gabriel glanced at the superintendent. Top deck's a better view. 10 minutes, tops. The man pried the door, listening to the machinery's pulse like a storm-weathered sailor. You'll be fine. They stepped inside. The elevator's hum a low, unsteady hymn. 10 seconds later, it sighed, a tired, mechanical exhale, and stopped. The lights flickered, then held. The car stilled, trapped between floors, the air suddenly thick with confinement. Sophie's fingers clenched Eleanor's coat, her breath quickening. It's okay, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the hammer of her heart. We're okay. Gabriel pressed the emergency call, his tone calm but urgent. Elevator car 2, stalled between 3 and 4. Passengers inside, no injuries. A voice crackled back, steady as stone. Copy. Maintenance on the way. Sophie's breath grew shallow, her eyes wide with panic. I can't feel the edges, she whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. Eleanor knelt, her pulse painting her neck, and met her daughter's gaze. Look at me, sweetheart. Count my freckles. I earned them in boardrooms without windows. Sophie tried, her voice shaky. 1, 2. She shook her head. The air's sticky. A knuckle rapped against the outer door, sharp and grounding. "Hey there," a man's voice called, warm as a hearth fire. "Name's James Carter. I'm with maintenance. You're safe." The name landed like a lifeline, steady and sure, though Eleanor couldn't say why it felt so right. "Who's in there?" James asked. "Three," Gabriel called back. "One child." "Okay, three," James said, his voice a beacon in the metal box. "Tell me a number between 1 and 10. Sophie's whisper was faint but firm. 7. "Seven's my lucky number too," James said, a smile threading through his words. "It means we breathe like we're blowing out birthday candles. In through the nose for 4, out through the mouth for 6. Can you help me practice?" Eleanor felt Sophie's grip loosen, just a fraction, her small chest rising and falling with purpose. "Good," James said. "Now a secret. This box is a liar. It tells your brain the sky's gone, but the sky's still there. Your brain just forgot the door. So we remind it. We breathe. Name 5 things you can touch." Sophie pressed her palm to the cool metal wall, her voice steadier. "Metal, hard hat, Mom's sleeve, my hand, Mr. Gabriel's elbow." "Excellent," James said, his tone a warm hand extended through the dark. "Now 4 things you can hear." Sophie tilted her head, listening. "The hum, your voice, Mom's heartbeat. It's really fast." Eleanor's throat tightened, but James's small laugh held no judgment. "We don't judge heartbeats around here. And the last one?" "My breath," Sophie finished, her voice a fragile but growing thread. The words wove a fragile calm, a tether to the world beyond the steel walls, as Eleanor held her daughter close, marveling at the quiet heroism in a stranger's voice. "Perfect," James Carter said, his voice a steady anchor through the metal walls of the stalled elevator. "Helps opening the door. You won't drop. Elevators are stubborn, not cruel." A clank echoed, sharp and resolute, followed by the grunt of machinery yielding to human will. The gate inched open, a sliver of light slicing across the floor like a promise kept. A crowbar bit into the metal, its groan a reluctant surrender, until the door parted wide enough to reveal a man's face. Late 30s, hair damp with effort, eyes careful yet kind. James wore a blue work shirt, Quinn stitched above the pocket, and a tool belt that spoke of reliability like a well-worn book. "Hello," he said, his hands poised but not intrusive. "I'm getting you out to the hallway. We take it slow because slow is smart." Eleanor nodded, relief flooding her veins, warming her knees like sunlight after a storm. She lifted Sophie toward the opening, her daughter's small frame trembling but trusting. James braced himself, not grabbing, letting Sophie choose the moment of contact. Her small hand reached out, and he anchored her weight with a strength that felt like it asked for no apologies. When Sophie's feet touched the hallway floor, she didn't step back. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with a child's unfiltered honesty. "You used a nice voice," she said. James's lips curved, a half smile that carried no pretense. "I saved the mean one for broken vacuum cleaners. It's less effective on people." Gabriel Ortiz climbed out next, his movements steady but shaken. Eleanor followed, her palms stinging from gripping the elevator's rail, her pride intact but reshaped by the moment. She turned to James, her voice heavy with more than etiquette could carry. "Thank you," she said, the words landing like stones in still water. He shrugged, a small gesture that belied the weight of what he'd done. "Got stuck in one when I was 8. My mom talked me out. I just borrowed her voice." Sophie studied him, then extended her hand with solemn grace. "I'm Sophie Lane, and for the record, 7's my lucky number." James shook her hand, matching her gravity. "James Carter. I'm fine with borrowing luck, too." The superintendent bustled over, radio crackling with apologies. "She's offline till we swap the relay," he said, gesturing to the elevator. "Quinn Enterprises will comp your shoes if they got scuffed." Gabriel waved it off. "We're fine." Eleanor wanted to say more, something to match the quiet thunder in her chest, how James had taken panic and given it a job, turning fear into breath, leading without fanfare. But she chose the simpler path. "Were you on your way to us, or did you just appear?" she asked. James's half-smile returned, warm as a hearth. "On my way to the roof. The heater's got a flair for drama in February. Sophie's gaze flicked to his tool belt. Do you fix everything? He chuckled, the sound low and honest. I try not to break it worse. That's half the job. Eleanor met his eyes, holding the gaze a heartbeat longer than strangers should. There was nothing ostentatious about him, yet he was exactly the kind of hero she'd vowed to notice. Steady, unassuming, unafraid of small rooms. Thank you, James, she said again, her voice softer, heavier. Anytime, he replied, meaning it in the practical, not poetic sense. As they walked toward the stairwell, Sophie slipped her hand into Eleanor's, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. Is he on the list? Eleanor's lips curved, a private smile. The list is for meetings. He just saved us in real life. Sophie's eyes sparkled. Sometimes real life is the meeting. Eleanor's smile deepened, toothless but true. Sometimes. Behind them, James knelt by the panel, his voice low as he spoke to the superintendent about relays and fail-safes, the language of those who keep buildings honest. He didn't look up again. He didn't need to. His words in the hallway, "We take it slow because slow is smart," echoed in Eleanor's mind, a truth carved in quiet strength. That night she added a line to the calendar only she saw. Ordinary moments. Note who gets smaller so a child can breathe. The following Monday, Eleanor stepped into the Quinn Tower lobby, her gaze fixed forward, her schedule a tightrope, her pulse a disciplined metronome. But there, kneeling beside a tool cart under the bronze Quinn Enterprises logo, was James Carter. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, a pencil tucked behind one ear, his calm energy a quiet melody that seemed to follow him everywhere. Sophie spotted him first, her whisper bright with recognition. It's the 7 guy, she said, tugging Eleanor's coat. James glanced up, his eyes warm with recognition, and stood, wiping his hands on a rag. Morning, he said simply. Eleanor nodded, a flicker of unexpected warmth stirring at his steady gaze. Thank you again, for the other day. He shook his head lightly. That's what I'm here for, making stuck things move again. Before Eleanor could reply, Sophie chimed in, her voice bold and unfiltered. We're going to Mom's office. Want to come? James's half-smile returned, a spark of amusement in his eyes. I don't think they let janitors crash CEO meetings. Sophie didn't miss a beat. Maybe they should. Eleanor caught the faint smirk on James's face, the kind that acknowledged a child's truth as the clearest in the room. Later that morning, Eleanor's corner office felt like a perch too high above the city's pulse. She was deep in a meeting about the Riverside Commons redevelopment, a flagship project teetering on collapse over engineering flaws. Her project manager, Paul, spread blueprints across the glass table, his voice tight. We're weeks behind, Eleanor. If we can't reroute the substructure supports, we lose the retail anchor. The city won't approve permits without a new load plan. The structural engineer on the call shook his head. Redesign from scratch. 6 figures, 3 months minimum. Eleanor tapped her pen against the blueprints, her jaw clenching. Losing Riverside Commons wasn't just numbers. It was homes for hundreds, the heart of her next year's portfolio, and leverage for 2 philanthropic partnerships. A knock at the door broke the tension. James stepped in, holding a small envelope. Sorry, he said, his voice steady. Mailroom sent this up. Looks important. He placed it on her desk, but his eyes flicked to the blueprints. Is that Riverside Commons? He asked, almost casually. Paul frowned. Confidential. Eleanor hesitated, her instincts stirring. It is. Why? James leaned in, pointing to the north column grid. You've got a load transfer bottleneck here. Swap to staggered micropiles and a stepped footing. Same load, no utility relocation. Cuts install time by 2/3. Paul blinked, caught off guard. That's not bad. James straightened, his tone unhurried. Worked on something similar in Boston, back when I wore a different shirt. Eleanor's brow lifted. What shirt was that? Project manager. Civil engineering, he said, no trace of bitterness. Before a bad lawsuit and a worse friend taught me humility. Now I mop floors and fix elevators, but the math still works. The conference line went silent, Then the engineer muttered, "That could actually solve it." Paul scribbled notes, urgency in his pen. "We'd need the calculations." James shrugged. "I can run them tonight. No charge. Call it a professional itch." Eleanor studied him, not the coveralls or the tool belt, but the quiet certainty in his voice, a strength that didn't demand applause. "Run them," she said. That evening, her inbox pinged at 9:17 p.m. The subject line read, "Riverside Commons Load Transfer Preliminary." The attached PDF was pristine, diagrams precise, formulas annotated, sketches clear as a builder's conscience. It was work you'd pay top consultants for, but its clarity spoke of dirt under nails, not just theory. Beneath the calculations, a note. "Eleanor, no guarantees, but this is the path I'd bet my own roof on. James." 2 days later, Eleanor presented the adjusted plan to the city review board. They approved it on the spot, breathing life back into Riverside Commons. When the news reached her desk, she didn't summon James to her office. She went to him, finding him in the sub-basement, checking a water line, his hands steady as ever. "Riverside Commons is approved," she said. He glanced up, one eyebrow lifting. "Good. That's one less building holding its breath." "You saved us millions," she said, her voice carrying the weight of the truth. He shook his head. "I just hated seeing a good project die of paperwork." Eleanor folded her arms, studying him. "Why didn't you go back to engineering?" James leaned against the pipe he'd been tightening, his gaze steady. "Life's not always linear. I had a son to raise, a legal mess to climb out of, and no stomach for partners who cut corners. Janitorial work is honest. No one lies about where the dirt is." The building's hum filled the pause, a quiet chorus to their words. "You're wasted down here," Eleanor said, her voice soft but firm. James's smile was faint, almost rueful. "No, I'm just not where most people expect to find me." Before she could respond, Sophie's voice echoed from the stairwell. "Mom! Mr. James!" She appeared, clutching a sketch pad, her eyes bright with purpose. "I drew the elevator we got stuck in, and a better one. Want to see?" James crouched, his expression open, attentive. "Nice. You gave it windows." Sophie nodded, matter of fact. "Everything feels safer with a view." Eleanor watched the exchange, her chest tightening at how James saw her daughter, not as a child to indulge, but as a person worth hearing. It shifted something deep within her, a quiet realignment of what she thought she knew about worth. That night, Eleanor sat at her kitchen counter, a mug of tea cooling beside her laptop. She opened James's email again, rereading his note. "The path I'd bet my own roof on." She thought of Sophie's sketch, its windows a child's vision of safety. She thought of Riverside Commons' future tenants, who'd have homes because a man in coveralls remembered the language of blueprints. And she thought, not for the first time, that some people were exactly where they needed to be. Not because of their title, but because of the quiet strength they carried, waiting for the right moment to shine. Somewhere in the city, James was likely tucking his son into bed, his hands steady, his heart true. Eleanor closed her laptop, the glow of the screen fading, and felt the future shift. Not a plan, but a possibility, fragile and real. Eleanor closed her laptop, the screen's glow fading into the lemon-scented stillness of the penthouse. In the quiet, she whispered to the empty room, her voice a soft vow carried by the city's distant hum. "I see you, Carter, even if no one else does yet." For the first time in weeks, the future felt less like a contract to negotiate and more like a horizon opening to possibility, fragile but radiant. The city glittered beyond the glass, its lights like stars refusing to be dimmed. The rooftop bar of the Regal Hotel shimmered with glass and chrome, a stage where success wore a garnish and ambition sparkled like the cocktails. Eleanor's 5 candidates stood in a loose arc near the terrace rail, their laughter practiced, just loud enough to be overheard, a performance of confidence meant for an absent audience. She arrived late on purpose, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, a deliberate choice to observe them unguarded. Sophie sat in a corner, her art supplies spread before her, sketching the skyline with the focus of a child who saw stories in every spire. James Carter naturally was nowhere on the guest list. This was an informal mixer, a chance to see the men's true colors, not a rescue mission. Yet as Eleanor moved closer, fragments of their conversation cut through the air, sharp and careless, tightening her jaw. "You can't tell me she's serious about giving the kid that much say," Oliver Reed muttered, swirling his whiskey with a smirk. "It's optics," Vincent Cole replied, his tone smooth as polished marble. "The press eats up a modern fairy tale, but a janitor, that's a headline you can't scrub." Gabriel Ortiz chuckled, low and conspiratorial. "I heard he saved Riverside Commons. Probably thinks that buys him a seat at the table." Nathan Blake adjusted his cufflinks, his voice cool. "Saving a project doesn't mean you belong in the boardroom. Or the family. Those are different leagues." They didn't notice Eleanor standing within earshot until Sophie's pencil froze, the soft scratch of graphite falling silent. The girl looked up, her voice clear and unshakable, slicing through the polished air. "Mr. James fixes things. People like you don't even see are broken." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Eleanor stepped forward before the men could recover, her voice gentle but firm. "Sophie, why don't you grab a soda from the bar?" When Sophie was out of range, Eleanor turned to the men, her gaze steady as steel. "You're here because I believed each of you had the self-awareness to know this isn't just about me. If you can't respect the people my daughter respects, you've already lost." Nathan's jaw tightened, his words faltering. "We were just—" "I know exactly what you were," Eleanor cut in, her voice a quiet blade. "And for the record, Riverside Commons tenants won't care about boardroom leagues or broom closet leagues. They'll just be grateful for walls that stand." The air cooled, the men's faces caught between shame and defiance. Eleanor walked away before their apologies could limp into existence, leaving their words to dissolve in the night. Downstairs in the hotel's lobby, Eleanor found Sophie by the fountain, stirring ice in her soda with a straw, her small frame silhouetted against the water's shimmer. "They don't like him," Sophie said, not a question, but a truth laid bare. "They don't know him," Eleanor replied, her voice soft but resolute. Sophie's eyes met hers unflinching. "They don't want to." The words lodged in Eleanor's mind like a stone in a shoe, sharp and persistent, haunting her through the evening's glittering haze. The next week, she caught James on the mezzanine of Quinn Tower, replacing a flickering light, his movements precise and unhurried. "Got a minute?" she asked. He glanced down from the ladder, a spark of curiosity in his eyes. "Sure. Coffee or a wrench?" "Neither," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Just your time." They sat in the staff lounge, a cramped space where vending machines hummed like tired sentinels, the air thick with the scent of burnt coffee. Eleanor recounted the rooftop conversation, Sophie's fierce defense, the cold shift in the room's atmosphere. James listened, leaning forward, forearms resting on his knees, his silence a canvas for her words. "Sounds like they're protecting their turf," he said finally, his voice steady but tinged with understanding. "It's more than turf," Eleanor replied, her gaze intense. "Some have deals pending with Quinn Enterprises. If they think you're in the picture, they might see me differently." His half-smile was wry, unguarded. "Then I'd better stay out of the picture." Something in her chest tightened, a spark of defiance flaring. "You think the answer to prejudice is disappearing?" James's eyes met hers, steady and clear. "No, I think it's choosing your battles. You can't win every room at once, and some rooms aren't worth the rent." Eleanor studied him, the quiet strength in his words, the way he measured people not by their noise, but by who held the beam when others stepped back. "You make it sound simple," she said. He shook his head, a faint chuckle escaping. "It's not. But I've been on job sites where the loudest guy was the most useless. I learned to value the ones who stay steady." That Friday, Eleanor took Sophie to the Riverside Market, a vibrant sprawl of stalls and laughter along the water's edge, meant as a mother-daughter escape. But halfway through, Sophie's eyes lit up, spotting Liam Carter in line for the carousel, a purple horse the prize of their negotiations. James stood beside him, holding 2 corn dogs, his expression almost sheepish under the fair's warm glow. "Small city," Eleanor said, their eyes meeting across the crowd. Smaller fare, James replied, a smile tugging at his lips. The kids darted off, their laughter a bright thread weaving through the noise. Eleanor and James stood by the railing, watching them, the carousel's music a soft heartbeat under their words. You know, Eleanor began, her voice soft but deliberate. Sophie's right. You fix things people don't even see are broken. James's gaze stayed on the carousel, his voice quiet. I don't do it for credit. I know, she said, her eyes tracing the lines of his face. That's what makes it dangerous for men like you. People think you don't mind being overlooked. He turned to her then, his gaze steady, unguarded. And what do you think? Eleanor's breath caught, the truth rising like a tide. I think some people are exactly where they need to be, until they are needed somewhere else. The carousel slowed, Sophie waving wildly, Liam grinning beside her. In that moment's symmetry, two kids laughing, two adults standing guard, Eleanor felt a shift, a quiet unraveling of her carefully guarded world, unsettling in the best possible way. But beneath the fair's warm hum, the rooftop's undercurrent lingered. She knew those men, Nathan, Oliver, Vincent, Gabriel, and especially Charles Warner, wouldn't vanish from her calendar. Their investments, influence, and opinions were woven into Quinn Enterprises' fabric, and one, she was certain, saw James not as a bystander, but as a rival. As James listened to Liam's animated tale of a giant stuffed bear prize, Eleanor's thoughts darkened. He had no idea the forces shifting beneath his feet. James, she said quietly, if someone tried to make your life harder here, would you tell me? His smirk was faint, teasing. Depends. You asking as the CEO or as Sophie's mom? Both, she said, her voice firm. Then yes, he replied, but only if I couldn't fix it myself first. That quiet confidence, free of drama, lodged in her chest like a stone she wanted to keep. The boardroom of Quinn Tower smelled faintly of rain and printer ink, the city skyline beyond the glass washed in silver. Eleanor leaned over the Riverside Commons blueprints, listening as Paul outlined the revised construction schedule. James's solution still hummed with fresh possibility, but in her world, victories were fleeting. We're clear on permits, Paul said, tapping the paper, but the material supplier's hesitating. They need confirmation on the courtyard drainage design. Eleanor exhaled, her control a thin, taut line. We'll give it to them. I won't let momentum die in committee. Her phone buzzed, Amelia Singh's name lighting the screen with urgency. Need to talk now. They met in Eleanor's office. Door closed, blinds angled against prying eyes. Amelia's tone was low, sharp as a blade. Charles Warner was in HR this morning, suggested a strategic personnel reassignment for James Carter. Eleanor's brows knit, a storm brewing behind her eyes. On what grounds? None stated, Amelia said. Just that it'd be beneficial to operations if James were moved to the West Side property. Said he's too visible here. Eleanor's voice was ice. Too visible? His exact words, Amelia replied, hesitating. West Side's an hour commute each way. It'd take him out of Sophie's orbit entirely. Eleanor's stomach tightened, a cold knot of anger. And HR's reaction? They're treating it as routine. You know how influence works, Eleanor. Charles has an equity stake in Central Plaza. He's not someone they want to cross. Eleanor leaned back, her eyes narrowing. So this is how he plays it? Amelia nodded, her voice grim. He sees James as a threat to his business tie with you, and maybe something more. That evening, in the parking garage's dim light, Eleanor spotted James closing the back of his old pickup, a coil of industrial hose slung over one shoulder, a box of cleaning supplies in hand. You're not leaving, are you? She asked, her voice sharper than intended. Not tonight, he said, a half smile softening his face. But they told me I'm reassigned to West Side next week. Her jaw clenched, the air suddenly heavy. They say why? Just that I'm needed there more, he said, his tone calm but knowing. I've heard that line before. Usually means someone's uncomfortable with you in the room. James, Eleanor said, stepping closer, her voice low and fierce. This isn't a coincidence. I know, he replied quietly. but I'm not here to make your life harder by turning it into a fight. I've seen enough job sites to know when politics outweigh the work. She held his gaze, defiance flaring. You're underestimating me if you think I'll just watch them push you out. He looked at her for a beat, then shook his head with a wry grin. You've got bigger fish to fry, Quinn. Let me handle the mop water. Her voice sharpened, cutting through the dim light. You're not mop water. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe gratitude, before he nodded once and slid the box into the truck bed. Thanks, but I'll be fine. Hutumanen. The next day, Eleanor found Sophie in the penthouse kitchen, hunched over a paper schedule, her small hands gripping a marker with purpose. What's this? Eleanor asked, peering over her shoulder. It's when I get to see Mr. James, Sophie said matter-of-factly. It's blank after next week. He said he's moving to another building. Eleanor's throat tightened, the weight of Sophie's words pressing against her ribs. It's complicated, she said softly. Sophie's gaze was unyielding. It's wrong. If someone's good at their job and nice to people, you don't send them away. That's like firing the sun because you're mad about the heat. Eleanor crouched, meeting her daughter's eyes. Sometimes people make changes because they think it's safer for them. Sophie's voice was firm, a child's truth cutting through adult games. Safer isn't always better. Better is when people like being where they are. By Friday, Eleanor drove to the West Side property, ostensibly to review a delayed renovation, but in truth to see what James was being sent to. She found him in a dim boiler room, sleeves rolled up, coaxing a stubborn valve into submission, with the patience of a man who'd tamed worse storms. Didn't expect to see you here, he said, looking up, a spark of surprise in his eyes. Consider this a wellness visit, she replied, her tone lighter than she felt. He wiped his hands, his voice steady. Building's fine, just needs patience. They ended up in the staff cafeteria, its long tables and buzzing vending machines steeped in the acrid scent of burnt coffee. Eleanor unwrapped a sandwich, more to occupy her hands than her hunger. You know, she began, her voice deliberate, I've worked with people who think they're irreplaceable. They almost always are. James's smile was faint, almost invisible. And the ones who are irreplaceable? They don't think about it, she said, her gaze locking with his. His smile softened, a quiet acknowledgement of her words. Their conversation paused when Sophie and Liam appeared in the doorway, clutching paper bags, their faces bright with mischief. Surprise lunch delivery, Sophie announced, her voice a burst of sunlight. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. How did you... Liam knew where the building was, Sophie said simply. We took the subway. Don't worry, Mrs. Quinn. We stayed together. James sighed, half amused, half exasperated. You two are trouble. Sophie grinned, undeterred. Good trouble. The air softened, the moment a fragile bridge between the ordinary and the profound. As Eleanor watched the children's easy camaraderie, their laughter a reminder of what she was fighting to protect. Good trouble, Sophie corrected with a grin, her voice a spark in the dim staff cafeteria of the West Side property. The long tables stretched under flickering fluorescent lights, the air heavy with the scent of burnt coffee and the hum of vending machines. Sophie and Liam traded snacks with the easy camaraderie of children unbound by adult pretenses, their laughter weaving through the clatter of paper bags. Eleanor and James sat across from them, their conversation a quiet undercurrent, words exchanged in low tones between bites of sandwiches and chips. There was a strange, unspoken ease in the moment, as if the sterile workplace had softened into something warmer. A table where two conversations, one of children and one of adults, wove together into a fleeting sense of home. As they left, Eleanor caught James's arm, her touch light but resolute. I'm not done with this, she said, her voice carrying a promise. James's eyes met hers, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I figured. As Eleanor walked out with Sophie, the concrete walls of the building seemed to fade, and she felt a shift deep within her. Seeing James here, away from the marble and glass of Quinn Tower, illuminated the quiet resilience he carried like a torch held low but steady. This wasn't just about keeping him near for Sophie's sake. It was about refusing to let the wrong people dictate who belonged in her life. Charles Warner thought he was winning a war, but Eleanor had just declared it, and she had no intention of losing. Rain slicked the sidewalks outside Quinn Enterprises, a steady drizzle blurring the city's edges, muffling its pulse to a low, restless hum. Eleanor stood at her office window, arms folded, jaw tight, the skyline beyond a silver wash of defiance. The past week had been a masterclass in silent warfare. Smiles in meetings, masking knives in the shadows. Amelia Singh entered without knocking, her face composed but her voice sharp as she dropped a memo on the desk. It's official. James's transfer order was processed this morning, effective Monday. Eleanor scanned the form, its clinical language, resource allocation, operational needs, ringing hollow, each word dripping with Charles Warner's influence. "Have you spoken to HR?" she asked, her tone controlled but edged. "They're in neutral facilitator mode," Amelia said, "which means Charles has more leverage in this building than they're willing to challenge." Eleanor pushed the paper aside, her fingers steady but her heart raging. "Then we'll find another way." Amelia's gaze was knowing, cautious. "Be careful, Eleanor. They're watching for overreach. You can't make it look personal." Eleanor's voice was quiet, a blade wrapped in silk. "It is personal. They made it that way." That night she drove to the West Side property under the guise of inspecting renovation progress. The lobby smelled of fresh paint and faded carpet, a space caught between renewal and neglect. James was there, kneeling on a drop cloth, replacing baseboard trim with the precision of a man who understood broken things. He looked up, surprised. "Didn't expect a CEO visit at 8 on a Friday." "Consider it an inspection," Eleanor replied, her tone lighter than the storm in her chest. "Of the building or the staff?" he asked, a half-smile softening his face. "Both," she said, studying him. He stood, wiping dust from his hands, his coveralls a canvas of honest work. "Place needs work, but it's solid. Kinda like me, I guess." Eleanor's gaze held his, searching. "You're taking this too calmly." James shrugged, his voice steady but tinged with experience. "I've been moved before. With a mop in one hand and a wrench in the other. You learn not to get attached to a zip code." Her voice sharpened, cutting through the dim light. "That's not the point. You're being moved because you're good at what you do, and because Sophie likes you. That scares some people." James's gaze softened, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "And you want to fight that battle?" "I don't want to," Eleanor said, her words fierce but measured. "But I will." Saturday morning, Sophie sat at the kitchen island, her face set with determination, a blank sheet of paper and a marker before her. "What are you drawing?" Eleanor asked, pouring coffee, its steam curling like a quiet promise. "A schedule," Sophie said, her voice firm. "For seeing Mr. James. He's moving buildings. But that doesn't mean we can't meet up." Eleanor took a seat, her heart catching at her daughter's resolve. "It might be harder," she said softly. Sophie's jaw set, a mirror of Eleanor's own defiance. "Then we try harder. You said good people don't disappear just because it's inconvenient." Eleanor squeezed her hand, a smile breaking through. "I did say that. Hamilton." By noon, Sophie had mapped out a plan: subway routes, weekend activities James and Liam might enjoy, and a column for ice cream opportunities, each detail etched with a child's precision. Eleanor couldn't help but smile at the care in every line. Later that day, her phone buzzed with a message from Amelia. Charles boasting to a contact about handling the janitor problem. Eleanor read it twice, a cold weight settling behind her ribs, sharp as betrayal. Sunday afternoon, she drove Sophie to a midtown cafe, calling it a mother-daughter outing, but fate had other plans. As they approached, Sophie spotted Liam through the window, his grin bright as the cafe's warm light. Moments later, James emerged from the counter, balancing 2 hot chocolates, his surprise at seeing them clear but warm. "This is turning into a pattern," James said, his voice carrying a quiet amusement. Sophie's eyes sparkled. "Good patterns are worth keeping." They settled at a corner table, the kids comparing school projects with animated chatter, while Eleanor leaned toward James, her voice low. "You know what Charles is saying?" James's expression didn't shift, but his eyes sharpened. "Let me guess. Moving me was an operational decision. His exact words. Handled the janitor problem, Eleanor said, her voice tight. James took a slow sip of coffee, unfazed. Sounds like he's more afraid of a mop than he should be. Eleanor's voice dropped, urgent. This isn't just about you. It's about who gets to decide who belongs in my world. James met her gaze, steady and searching. And what if belonging comes with a cost you don't want to pay? Then I decide if it's worth it, she said, her words a vow. He studied her, then nodded toward the kids, a faint smile breaking through. They already decided. As they left, the four of them stepped into the cool air, the city feeling smaller, as if it could fit inside the warmth of the table they'd shared. In the car, Sophie leaned against the window, her voice soft but certain. You're not going to let them send him away, are you? Eleanor glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her resolve a quiet fire. Not without a fight. That night, in the hush of her apartment, Eleanor opened her laptop, the city's lights reflecting like promises on the glass. She drafted a memo, not to HR, not to the board, but to herself. This isn't about a transfer, it's about influence. Those who assume I'll choose comfort over conviction. They're wrong. She closed the file, the wet streets outside gleaming with the weight of her intent. Monday morning brought a flood of emails, but one stood out. An invitation to a charity weekend at Lakeview Lodge, hosted by investors, including Charles Warner. Eleanor stared at it, her mind already spinning. If they wanted to play on their turf, she'd bring her own storm, and she knew exactly who she wanted by her side, mop, wrench, and all. Then a sentence hit like a fire alarm. Central Plaza atrium drawings are missing. Amelia stood in her doorway, face composed, voice taut. Missing where? Eleanor asked, her pulse quickening. From the project server, Amelia said. Final revision set. Charles flagged it at 7:10 a.m. Says it's a breach. Eleanor's fingers tightened on her pen. Who has access? Senior team plus facilities for logistics. That includes James. Of course it did. Eleanor rose, her voice clipped. Get IT and legal. By 9, the executive conference room was a battleground. The IT director's laptop glowed blue, HR clutched a legal pad, and Charles Warner stood in a suit that screamed its own price tag, greeting Eleanor as if this were a polite brunch. Unfortunate, he said, hands open, but we need swift action. Those drawings are proprietary. A leak jeopardizes the capital stack. He clicked through logs with theatrical precision. At 6:41 p.m., Friday, document Atrium Rev C Final was moved to a local folder on a removable drive. User credential C Warner. At 6:43 p.m., same credential moved it back. At 6:48, a different credential, J Carter, accessed the shared directory. His smile was a blade without a handle. There you have it. The janitor browsed a folder he had no business in. HR glanced at Eleanor. We need to suspend Mr. Carter pending investigation. Due process, of course. Eleanor's voice was level, but her eyes burned. We don't punish access. We punish intent. Charles spread his hands, his tone dripping with false concern. Intent? He was seen near the server closet. Night crew badge logs put him on that floor. Because he cleans it, Eleanor said, her words sharp as flint. His tone softened, a performance of empathy. Eleanor, I respect your personal considerations, but this is about safeguarding assets. I don't mix personal with assets, she shot back, and my consideration is this company's integrity. HR cleared her throat. We'll place Mr. Carter on paid leave for 72 hours, standard. Eleanor exhaled, the word standard tasting like a lie. Fine, she said, but pull the full revision history. I want every touch, every minute stamp, Eleanor said, her voice a blade honed by resolve, and ask security to preserve camera footage for Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. Charles Warner nodded, his smile a mask of compliance, as if the idea were his own. In the facilities office, James Carter folded the suspension notice with deliberate care, the paper creasing into a sturdy square in his palm. I didn't take anything, he said quietly, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of accusation. Eleanor met his gaze, her own unwavering. I know. He started to explain, then paused, as if weighing which hill was worth dying on. I checked deliveries to ensure the night shift didn't misplace boxes. That's the only reason I saw project names on that screen. You don't owe me a defense, Eleanor said, her tone firm but warm. His eyes held a rueful glint. Feels like I do. She shook her head. Let me do my job. You do yours. Even if right now your job is waiting. He tucked the paper away, a faint smile breaking through. Waiting's still a verb. That afternoon, Sophie sat cross-legged in Eleanor's office, her sketchpad open. A world of possibilities in every stroke. Liam perched beside her, doodling a toolbox with the focus of a young architect. It wasn't ideal to have them here. Eleanor's day was a storm front of deadlines and betrayals, but their presence was a quiet anchor, steadying the air. Is Mr. James in trouble? Sophie asked, her voice small but piercing. For now he's resting, Eleanor said, choosing her words like stepping stones across a river. Liam murmured, eyes on his sketch. Adults always give naps to the truth. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. What did you say? He glanced up, hesitant. On Friday, Dad showed me his tablet while we waited for the subway. His sync app popped a banner, Atrium Rev C Final, updated by C. Warner, 6:42 p.m. I remember because I asked, what's an atrium? And he said, a fancy word for tall air. He laughed. Sophie nodded, holding up her sketch. I drew a tall air. Eleanor stood so fast her chair nudged the rug, her heart racing. Liam, are you sure about the time? His face tightened, hurt flickering in his eyes. I'm not a liar. I didn't say you were, she said, crouching to meet his gaze. Sometimes 1 minute is the difference between a mistake and a plan. He considered, his voice soft. It was dark, but not night-night. The train was late. Eleanor turned to Amelia, who stood with arms folded, her expression sharp. Get it to pull external sync notifications. If a personal device was subscribed to the public read-only project feed, it should have seen the version event. Liam's eyes widened. Am I in trouble? Eleanor's smile was warm, fierce. You might be the reason a good man keeps his job. Sophie leaned toward him, grinning. Told you we're good trouble. By evening, the IT director returned with a drive, his voice clipped. Found mirrored events. Friday 6:41 to 6:43 p.m. Document moved off and back on by C. Warner. A read-only watcher, an unknown device, received the update ping. He paused, scrolling. Camera footage shows Mr. Warner entering the server room at 6:39 with his assistant. He reported the breach Monday morning. Eleanor's jaw worked, anger simmering beneath her calm. And Mr. Carter? Authenticated on the floor at 6:48. No file downloads. His permissions are clean. Amelia sighed, her voice low. So Charles moved the file, moved it back, then cried wolf. Classic pretext. Eleanor's tone was deliberate, sharp. You don't say that outside this room, not yet. She called HR, her voice unwavering. Pause the suspension, effective immediately. On what basis? They asked. On the basis that I said so, and I sign your budget, she replied, then softened. And on new information, legal has it. She hung up, staring out at the city until its skyline steadied her resolve. The confrontation came not in a boardroom, but at Lakeview Lodge, a cedar-scented haven where strategy hung as thick as the Vivaldi played by a quartet, its notes cloaking ambition and civility. Investors milled, servers glided like chess pieces, and Charles Warner found Eleanor at a window, the lake beyond a mirror of night. Glad you came, he said smoothly, his voice polished as his suit. We can discuss next steps on Central Plaza, assuming we've got our arms around the drawings. Eleanor's gaze was steel. We do, thanks to meticulous logs. His brow lifted, a challenge. She didn't ease him in. It pulled camera footage. You accessed the server room Friday night, moved the file, moved it back, then raised a flag to HR Monday. It's all time-stamped. Charles's smile thinned, a crack in his facade. We all move files. I flagged an irregularity. That's diligence. Eleanor's voice was a quiet blade. What you flagged was a mess you made to justify removing a man who threatens your narrative. His chuckle was dry, brittle. You're reading novels into audits. And you're underestimating how well I read, she shot back. He stepped closer, his voice low, conspiratorial. Off the record, Eleanor, your affection for the janitor is blurring your governance. Investors don't like blurred lines. Her eyes didn't waver. Investors prefer honest lines. Here's one. If you manipulate my staff again to secure proximity to my decisions, you'll find yourself far from all of them. Charles studied her, searching for a bluff. Be careful not to make this personal, he murmured. It became personal when you tried to make my daughter's safe person look dangerous, she replied, her voice a vow. He held her gaze a moment longer, then tipped his glass, conceding a point in a larger game. I'm sure legal will enjoy the exercise. They already are, Eleanor said, walking away before triumph could sour into gloating. Outside, the night gathered on the lake like a listening ear, its stillness a canvas for her resolve. Tuesday morning, James returned to Quinn Tower, drawn by instinct and the rhythm of work where his hands made sense. Eleanor met him by the service elevator, her voice steady but warm. It's paused, the suspension. He nodded, cautious, his eyes searching hers. Because you said so. Because of the facts, she corrected, and because a kid remembered the difference between 642 and 643. A smile tugged at his lips. Liam. Liam, she echoed, her voice softening. His shoulders eased, the week's weight sliding to the floor like dust swept clean. I don't like being a problem you have to solve, he said, his voice low, honest. You're not, Eleanor replied, her gaze unflinching. You're the problem some people didn't expect me to notice. He considered her, a small, disbelieving laugh escaping. You really are dangerous. Only to lies, she said, a spark of defiance in her smile. He glanced down the hallway. So, where do you want me? Eleanor thought of Charles's glittering lobby, his calculated words, the way he tried to twist integrity into optics. Then she thought of Sophie's steady hand, Liam's careful memory, and a building waiting for its bones to hold true. Right where you were, she said. Visible. He nodded. Okay. As he turned to go, she added, almost an afterthought, and James, thank you for waiting like it was a verb. He smiled without turning, his voice a quiet promise. Slow is smart. As James disappeared into the building's hum, Eleanor stood still, feeling the air shift, as if truth had been set back in its rightful place, steady and unyielding. The invitation arrived later that day, a white envelope with the Quinn Enterprises seal, James's name etched in precise, looping script. In the maintenance break room, Liam leaned over his shoulder, eyes wide. What's that? James hesitated, unfolding the letter. An invitation from Mrs. Quinn, a weekend at Willow Lake Resort as thanks for my help to the company. Liam grinned, mischief dancing in his eyes. Sounds like a date. James tucked the letter away, his voice firm but warm. Not a date. Friday afternoon, the drive to Willow Lake Resort was quiet at first. Snow-tipped pines lining the road like silent sentinels. Sophie sat beside Eleanor in the SUV, Liam next to James in the back, the hum of the engine a soft backdrop to their thoughts. Eleanor broke the silence, her voice gentle but deliberate. I hope you don't feel pressured to be here. I just thought, after everything, it might be good to step away from offices and boardrooms. James gave a short nod, his gaze on the passing trees. I'm not sure I belong in a place like this. Eleanor caught his eyes in the rearview mirror, her voice soft but certain. Then you haven't seen what matters here. The resort was a vision of picture-perfect luxury, the kind Eleanor's world was built on, yet she bypassed the formal dinner for a walk by the frozen lake. The kids ran ahead, their laughter skipping across the ice-crusted air like stones on water. You work too much, James said quietly, his breath misting in the cold. Eleanor smiled without looking at him, the truth of his words settling deep. You sound like Sophie. Maybe she's right, he said, his voice a gentle challenge. She turned to him, her eyes softening. I've been told that before. But work, it's how I've kept control, how I've protected her. James's gaze followed Sophie and Liam, who were attempting to skip stones across the ice. Control's an illusion. You can only hold so much before your hands get tired. The words landed like a truth she'd been dodging, heavy and undeniable. That night they gathered in the lodge's common area, the fire crackling in a stone hearth, cedar scent thick in the air. Eleanor sat on the rug, Sophie curled against her side, while Liam built a tower of wooden blocks with careful precision. "Uncle James," Sophie called suddenly, her voice bright. "Your turn." He looked up from his coffee, surprised. "My turn for what?" "To build something," she said, holding out a block. "But it has to be a bridge, like in your stories." James crouched beside them, his hands gentle as he began. "A bridge has to be strong here," he tapped the center, "but flexible here." Sophie's eyes lit up. "Like people?" He paused, meeting her gaze with a quiet smile. "Exactly like people." Eleanor watched, her chest tightening at how effortlessly he spoke to her daughter, as if he'd known her forever, his words a bridge between their worlds. The next day brought sledding, snowball fights, and a near disaster when Liam's sled veered toward the tree line. James sprinted across the slope, scooping his son up with a breathless grace, snow dusting his jacket. "You okay?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. Liam grinned, brushing snow from his hair. "You're fast." Eleanor arrived moments later, her face etched with fear, her breath catching. James gave her a quick nod, his eyes steady. "He's fine." Her relief was a silent tide, washing over her, but she noticed Sophie slip her mitten into James's hand as they walked back, a small gesture that spoke volumes in its trust. As the SUV rolled away from Willow Lake Resort, snow-dusted pines fading in the rearview mirror, Eleanor felt a seismic shift within her, like the earth settling after a quake. The weekend, meant as a test of compatibility, had instead rewritten the blueprint of her desires, whispering truths about what she needed, not just for Sophie, but for herself. James kept his eyes on the road, but Eleanor caught the faintest curve of a smile at the corner of his mouth, a quiet promise that lingered like the last note of a song. The city loomed ahead, its skyline a jagged hymn to ambition. But for the first time, Eleanor saw it not as a battleground, but as a canvas for a life she was beginning to imagine. The ballroom of Quinn Tower gleamed with restrained elegance. White orchids in crystal vases, gold-trimmed chairs, and soft piano notes weaving through hushed conversations like threads of silk. This wasn't a corporate gala or charity auction. Tonight was personal, a culmination of 4 weeks spent dancing on the edge of two worlds, the polished circle of New York's elite bachelors and the unassuming presence of a janitor who belonged nowhere, yet everywhere that mattered. Eleanor had told herself this event was to formalize her choice, that the reporters and board members were mere optics. But as she stepped onto the small stage, gazing out at the candidates, she knew she'd built a stage for something beyond her control, a moment where truth could no longer be choreographed. Charles Warner stood among them, his navy three-piece suit sharp as glass, his smile a calculated edge. Nathan Blake, Dr. Henry Foster, Gabriel Ortiz, and Oliver Reed were poised, their tailored confidence a stark contrast to James Carter, who lingered near the back in his best shirt, ironed with care by Liam that morning. He didn't meet Eleanor's eyes, his presence quiet but unyielding, like a lighthouse in a storm. Sophie sat at a table to the right, legs swinging under her dress, Liam whispering something that sparked a smile. Eleanor took a breath, her voice steady but warm, cutting through the room's expectant hush. Tonight is about possibility, about building a life, not just a career or a reputation, but a family. She gestured for the candidates to speak, and one by one, they stepped forward. Oliver Reed's voice was smooth as silk, a financier's promise. "Eleanor, I offer stability. My network could triple the Quinn legacy in a decade." Dr. Foster followed, his tone gentle but assured. "I offer a home where Sophie will always be safe, with care rooted in my work." Gabriel Ortiz spread his hands, his architect's vision expansive. "I can design a future, in concrete and in the life we share." Charles spoke last, his eyes flicking toward James for a fleeting, venomous moment. "Eleanor, I understand your world's demands. I can stand beside you in every deal, every boardroom. Together, we'd be untouchable." Their words were polished pitches, each a merger proposal cloaked in charm. Sophie's expression remained unreadable, a quiet fortress against their eloquence. Eleanor turned to her daughter, her voice soft but deliberate. "Sophie, Would you like to share your thoughts? A ripple of surprise ran through the room, polite but electric. Sophie stood, smoothing her dress, her small frame radiating a clarity that belied her age. I listened to everyone, she began, her voice small but piercing. And you're all nice. Soft chuckles murmured through the crowd, but Sophie pressed on, her gaze sweeping from face to face. But everyone talked about what they can give Mom. No one said what they'd be like as a dad. The room stilled, the air thick with the weight of her words. I don't need someone to make our company bigger. I need someone who makes our family better. Someone who makes pancakes on Sunday, fixes a squeaky door, tells me when I'm wrong. Someone like... She turned, scanning the crowd, then walked toward the back with purpose. Like Liam's dad. The air tightened, every eye following as Sophie stopped before James. Mr. Carter, she said, her tone formal, borrowed from the adults she'd heard in meetings. Would you come here? James froze, his voice a low plea. Sophie, please. He moved slowly, as if stepping into the heart of a storm, each step heavy with the weight of the moment. Sophie took his hand, leading him to the stage, her small fingers steady in his. Facing the room, she spoke simply, her voice a beacon. I don't need a vision statement. I just need this. She squeezed his hand, and the room erupted in gasps, whispers, and camera flashes, the light fracturing like stars against the crystal vases. Eleanor stood motionless, her pulse a loud drum in her ears. Charles broke the silence, his voice sharp with disdain. With all due respect, Eleanor, is this the image you want to project? A CEO choosing a janitor as a life partner? Her head turned, her gaze cutting through him. Charles, you're mistaking an image for a life. His smile faltered, a crack in his polished armor. She looked at James, truly seeing him, the quiet strength in his eyes, the way he hadn't fought to defend himself, the way Sophie's hand rested in his, as if it had always belonged there. In that moment, the room's noise fell away, leaving only clarity. 4 weeks ago, Eleanor said, stepping closer to them, her voice steady but rich with feeling, I thought this was about finding someone who fit my world. But Sophie's right. It's about finding someone who fits our life. She turned to the crowd, her words a quiet manifesto. James Carter has done more for my family and Quinn Enterprises in 4 weeks than most could in 4 years. He saved contracts, solved problems, and showed my daughter that kindness is strength. Somewhere along the way, he reminded me what it feels like to trust someone completely. A hush enveloped the room, heavy with meaning. James's jaw tightened, his voice low. Eleanor, are you sure? I've never been sure, she replied, her eyes unwavering. Sophie beamed, her smile a burst of light, and Liam's grin lit the stage, wide enough to rival the chandeliers. It wasn't the ending Eleanor had planned, not one that made sense on paper. But as she reached for James's hand, the flashbulbs erupted, and for the first time in years, she didn't care about the headlines. This wasn't a business decision. It was the beginning of a life. The morning after brought no victory, only the gathering of a storm. Eleanor's phone buzzed relentlessly. Texts, emails, missed calls. Headlines screamed across screens. Quinn chooses janitor over billionaires, romance, or recklessness. Eleanor Quinn's surprising pick. By 9, the 42nd floor conference room was a battlefield. The Quinn Enterprises board seated with faces tight as drawn bows. Catherine Wells, the board chair, spoke without preamble, her voice cold. The optics of this are problematic, Eleanor. Investors are concerned. An older member leaned forward, his tone heavy with judgment. We've built a brand synonymous with prestige. Your personal life is now a trending topic, and not in a good way. Eleanor folded her hands on the table, her calm a shield against their disapproval. You're concerned about prestige. I'm concerned about integrity. Those aren't the same. Charles scoffed from the end of the table, his voice dripping with disdain. Integrity doesn't sign contracts. Image does. Public perception can tank stock value faster than a recession. Catherine's tone softened, but her words were firm. No one's asking you to end it immediately, but reconsider the public nature of it. Distance yourself for now. Eleanor's gaze swept the table, unflinching. Distance myself from a man who saved this company twice in a month. From someone my daughter trusts more than anyone? That's what you're suggesting. No one met her eyes, their silence a concession they wouldn't voice. Outside, cameras lurked, and social media split. Half enchanted, half skeptical. The latter loudest where business mattered most. By noon, Eleanor sat in her office. The city skyline a silver expanse beyond the glass. The easy choice would be retreat. A graceful PR pivot, a polite fade out. It's what they expected. Her phone rang, Margaret Hayes's voice gentle but probing. Darling, you've worked so hard for your place in this world. Don't throw it away for sentiment. Eleanor closed her eyes, her mother's words a weight she'd carried before. It's not sentiment, Mother, it's truth. James isn't the risk. Losing myself again is. Margaret sighed, her voice soft but insistent. Then you'd better defend him in a way no one can twist. The opportunity came swiftly. The next morning, a reporter from the City Herald requested a live press conference to set the record straight. Her PR team warned against it, their voices urgent. You'll only give the story more oxygen. But Eleanor's decision was made. A fire kindled in her chest, ready to burn through the noise. At precisely 2 p.m., Eleanor Quinn stepped onto the podium in the Quinn Tower lobby. A sea of microphones aimed at her like arrows drawn taut. The room pulsed with the restless energy of press, employees, and board members. Catherine Wells and Charles Warner among them, their faces tight with expectation. Eleanor's voice cut through the murmur, steady yet warm, a beacon of truth in a storm of scrutiny. Many of you have questions about why a woman in my position would choose someone like James Carter. The crowd stirred, a ripple of whispers, but she didn't flinch. Let me tell you about James. He's a single father who's raised his son to be kind, curious, and brave. A man who, amid his own setbacks, found ways to lift others. Ways that saved Quinn Enterprises not once, but twice. He's not a janitor because it's all he can be. He's a janitor because he refused to let a wrongful lawsuit steal his integrity along with his career. Her words hung in the air, heavy with conviction, as cameras clicked like a swarm of restless fireflies. I've spent years in rooms where worth is measured by net worth, she continued, her gaze sweeping the crowd, pausing on Charles just long enough to let her meaning sink like a stone. But thanks to James and my daughter, I've learned the truest measure of a person is how they treat those who can do nothing for them. I'm not here to defend my choice as a CEO. I'm here to stand by my choice as a human being. If that costs me investors, they're not the partners we need. The hush that followed wasn't silence. It was the sound of a narrative shifting, the ground moving beneath the room's polished veneer. A reporter raised a hand, voice sharp. Ms. Quinn, are you saying you're officially in a relationship with Mr. Carter? Eleanor's smile was small, unshakable. In a world obsessed with power, I'm choosing partnership. And yes, I'm choosing him. In the back, half hidden, James stood with Liam beside him, his expression not pride or embarrassment, but a deeper gratitude, a quiet acknowledgement of her courage. As the press conference ended, Catherine Wells approached Eleanor in the corridor, her voice low. You've just made it harder for all of us. Eleanor didn't slow her stride, her words sharp but calm. Or maybe I made it easier for those who remember why we built this company. That evening, James called, his voice soft through the line. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Eleanor replied, her conviction a steady flame. If I won't stand for the people who matter most, all my boardroom battles mean nothing. A pause, then his voice softened, a smile audible. You've made it impossible for me to keep my distance. She laughed, light and free. Good. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time, Eleanor knew she didn't need it to end. She just needed to know who'd stand with her in it. Spring air in upstate New York carried the faint sweetness of blooming lilacs, drifting over the Quinn family's countryside home. A small white tent stood in the backyard, draped with fairy lights that swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, glowing like stars tethered to earth. No grand ballroom, no hundreds of guests, just family, close friends, and a promise heavier than any headline. Eleanor smoothed her simple ivory dress in front of the mirror, its fabric unadorned, chosen not for the world's eyes but for the life she wanted. Margaret Hayes stepped into the room, her eyes soft with rare tenderness. "I've never seen you this happy." Eleanor adjusted a delicate pearl bracelet, her smile quiet but radiant. "That's because I'm not dressing for the world today. I'm dressing for the people who've become my world." Outside, James stood under the tent in a navy suit, tailored not by a luxury atelier, but by a local craftsman who knew his story. Liam tugged at his sleeve, adjusting the boutonniere with exaggerated care. "Nervous, Dad?" he asked. James chuckled, a low rumble. "I've built skyscrapers and wrestled HVAC systems in July heat without breaking a sweat. But this has me shaking." Liam grinned, undaunted. "Don't worry, she already chose you." James crouched, meeting his son's eyes. "That's the thing, buddy. Choosing each other isn't a one-time deal. It's something you do every day." Soft piano chords began, and the small crowd turned as Sophie stepped into the aisle, her pale blue dress catching the light, her bouquet small but bright, her smile outshining the fairy lights above. Liam joined her halfway, offering his arm with the awkward gallantry of an 8-year-old, their steps a quiet vow of their own. Then Eleanor appeared, and James's breath caught, not at the dress or the sunlight weaving through her hair, but at the certainty in her steps, each one a silent promise. They stood together, the officiant's voice a gentle hum. But for a moment, the world was just their heartbeats, catching up to every choice that had led them here. "James," Eleanor began, her voice steady but rich with emotion. "When we met, I thought I needed someone to build the life I planned. But you showed me the life I truly needed. You taught me that home isn't walls or places, it's the people inside. I promise to protect that, to protect us every day." James's voice was lower, thick with feeling. "Eleanor, I thought I'd lost what defined me, but I learned it's not what you build, it's who you stand beside when the walls fall. You've stood by me, and today I stand by you. I promise, no matter the storms, you'll never face them alone." They exchanged simple gold bands, no diamonds, just the weight of their choices gleaming with quiet truth. Sophie and Liam clapped first, their joy igniting a ripple of applause through the small crowd. The afternoon unfolded in laughter, clinking glasses, and the joyful chaos of children weaving between tables. Eleanor caught James's hand resting lightly on Liam's shoulder, or leaning in to hear Sophie's latest tale of school projects. His attention a gift she hadn't known she needed. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a family settling into its true shape, a tapestry woven from trust and care. As the sun dipped, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold, James slipped away, returning with a small wooden box. "It's not a wedding gift," he said, handing it to Eleanor. "It's something I've been working on since I knew we'd get here." Inside, a neatly folded letter rested atop a document, the Carter Quinn Scholarship Fund, dedicated to those rebuilding after unjust losses. Eleanor's eyes welled, her voice catching. "You always said you wanted to give back. You didn't tell me you'd started." James's smile was soft, steady. "I wanted it to be ours, not just mine." Later in the kitchen, the four of them stood with sleeves rolled up, preparing a late dinner, the catered food long gone under the guests' enthusiasm. Sophie chopped tomatoes with exaggerated seriousness, while Liam stirred sauce with a scientist's focus. "You know," Sophie said, grinning, "I think I picked pretty well." Eleanor laughed, ruffling her daughter's hair. "You did, sweetheart. Better than I could have alone." James glanced at Liam, his voice warm. "I'd say I did pretty well, too." Liam, eyes on the sauce, smirked. "Told you she'd choose you." The kitchen hummed with clinking dishes, the scent of fresh basil, and voices overlapping in an easy rhythm. It was nothing grand, nothing headline-worthy, yet in that small, ordinary moment, it was everything. As they sat together, Eleanor felt truth settle deep within her. Titles, wealth, and prestige were never the foundation she sought. Love, respect, and honesty were, and with them, they'd built something unshakable. In the soft glow of the kitchen lights, laughter spilling into the night, their story didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. Status doesn't build a family, love does. Respect holds it together. Honesty makes it a home. Sometimes life gives not what you planned, but what you need. Eleanor thought she was searching for the perfect candidate. James believed his best chapters were past. Together, they learned family isn't built on titles or status, but on the quiet choice to stand by each other day after day. Where are you reading from? And what part of this story touched your heart? Share your thoughts. They matter. If this tale stirred you, inspired you, or rekindled your belief in love, subscribe to join our next journey. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love and the beauty of the family you choose.